Hello, dear readers. This is Jurgen Appelo broadcasting from Brussels, Belgium. One of my favorite things to do is talking with smart people about the things that I love and the things that interest me. One of those things is creativity. I call myself a creative networker, and I believe that this century is the age of creativity. Well, one of the smart people I recently chatted with is David Burkus. He is the author of The Myths of Creativity, and I asked him a couple of questions about that topic. He allowed me to share the results with you, so enjoy. Hello everyone, this is Jurgen Appelo from the Netherlands, and I'm speaking with David Burkus from, where are you right now, David? Actually, I didn't ask you.
I am in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which if you don't know where that is, that's totally okay.
I'm European, so I don't even know where Oklahoma is.
There you go. It's kind of like the dead center of the country. It's a smaller city, and it's actually a great place to be an author speaker because I can get to either coast where events happen that I need to speak at inside of like 3 hours flight. So it's great.
That sounds, you're as smart as I am, because I'm from the Netherlands, but I live in Brussels, and it's also like the hub of Europe with flights in all directions. It's very good.
Yeah, I've got to fly down one to get to the hub of all of the U.S., which would be, in my opinion, is Dallas-Fort Worth. But it's still pretty nice.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for joining, David. I invited you to have a chat about the creativity, and in particular the book that you wrote about it, The Myths of Creativity. And
Sneak that in. There you go. Sorry, I have to.
It looks awesome. It looks very creative. So. How did you arrive on this topic of creativity? What attracted you to it? How did that come about?
Yeah, so this is it's been a weird journey for me. The site that I run a podcast called Leader Lab for the longest time that was on leadership, innovation, and strategy. So the innovation piece was always there. And when I was finishing a doctorate in graduate school, doing my dissertation on that innovation set, particularly sort of trying to figure out what is it about leaders of creative companies that makes the company so outstandingly innovative or creative. And I was trying to find a bunch of different metrics, but trying to go back to the very beginning of the organization. Like, it's really easy to look at Apple or Pixar or Google or something like that and say, oh yeah, well, here's all the reasons why they're creative compared to a boring sort of non-creative counterpart. But if you go back to when they very, very, very first started, you just have a couple entrepreneurs and a dream, right? So what did they do? And with the raw material that they had, particularly with the people that they brought in and that sort of stuff. And actually, I had a lot of trouble finding differentiators, with the exception of kind of the language that people use. So I started finding that a lot of leaders of creative organizations, people inside of creative organizations, and even individual creative professionals talk about creativity differently than the sort of normal people, the non-creatives, although I don't really like separating them out in that term for reasons discussed in the book. And the people that sort of aren't tapping into their creativity every day, they use words that honestly sound a lot like a mythology. So this is where that idea of the myths of creativity came from. They say things like, "It just came to me," right? Which, where was it before, right? Or they'll talk about that eureka moment, or they'll say that so and so is creative and I'm just not. Like, it's something that's a genetic gift, or something like that. And there's not a lot of research to support that. On the genetic front, it's a little bit mixed. But nature hasn't totally disproved nurture. Nurture still has a bigger role than nature, right? And so that led me to really investigate what are the ways what are the differences in perspective on how creativity works. And that's where the idea of the myths came from. Is really, I think everybody is born with the potential to be creative. I've never met a non-creative kindergartner, right? But somewhere along the line, as they grow up into adulthood, something happens, and a lot of people stop keeping that practice up. The people who do keep the practice up talk about it very differently than that. And so that's what I was really looking into, is what are the faulty beliefs that presumably the people who aren't in their creative practice have attained that are, like I said, are faulty and therefore need to be rewritten, right? What are the myths that are holding people back?
Right. And you, what you just said reminded me of a comment that I frequently get. I make my own illustrations for my book, so I consider myself a somewhat creative person. But then people often say, "Oh, I wish I was as creative as you were. I cannot draw," is what they often say. And that's something that you touch upon as well. How is it that everyone in kindergarten says, yes, yes, I can draw, but then they unlearn it somehow? What makes them unlearn it or think that they can't?
So I blame elementary school. No, not really, but sort of. So to me, I talk about it as the very last myth in the book. We're really bad at judging whether or not an idea is creative or not. Creativity involves sort of divergent thinking and convergent thinking, coming up with lots of ideas and coming up with the right idea, right? And as we go through school systems and societal systems and all of that, they really value the right idea. Right? And so as you go through schooling, anywhere in the world, schooling is based on if I can give you a question and you give me back the right answer. Not lots of answers, but the right answer, right? And that works great when we're trying to give people a basic knowledge of how the world works that we already know. But for finding and creating new knowledge, that doesn't work so well. We need to come up with lots of answers so we can test them and then converge down to the right answer. And so I think the people that come out of their practice and say, I can't draw, really, they can. They don't like what it looks like when they draw.
Right.
But everybody can draw a stick figure, right? The problem is it doesn't look right, so they stop, right?
I see.
And I think that's primarily sort of what happens. The research by a guy named Paul Torrance in the United States shows that somewhere around fourth grade, people's perspective of their creativity drops drastically. And if you think about in the U.S. education system, fourth grade is around when things like recess and play and social time take a backseat to getting all of the answers right. And so I think that's a lot of what happens. And I don't want to throw education under the bus because I think that's asserted by our overall societal system that, again, rewards that. So
I see. Right. So it sounds like people are raising the bar for themselves the older that they get, and then don't consider what they create. They need the stick figures. They don't see that as creativity anymore.
Right. I think they know what it's supposed to look like, and when theirs doesn't look like that, what doesn't, again, convergent, when it doesn't look like the right answer, they say, well, that's because I can't do it. Well, that's not really true. It's because you just need to practice. You need to do this a lot to get over here. Right.
Exactly.
Anything worth doing is worth doing terribly until you can figure out how to do it right.
Okay, so here's another question for you. I was a great number of years ago. I was a manager of a couple of designers, web designers, and one of the web designers, she had a tendency to tell me whenever I asked about her progress and what she had done for a new website that had to be developed for a customer. She said, well, today was just not my day. I was not able to be creative. I need a glass of wine. And then I stood there thinking, are you kidding me? I'm paying you as a professional. I expect you to be creative from 9 to 5. Now, was I wrong in that assumption, or was she not correct in the way creativity works? What's your idea there?
So I'm going to give you a very complicated answer.
All right.
The first is that there's actually some research that shows that things like alcohol can increase divergent thinking, but it's really mixed, and I'm definitely not solid enough to support a thesis like that. So. I think it's a matter of when. The creative process, like I said before, involves divergent and convergent thinking, coming up with lots of answers. The easiest way to think of it is coming up with lots of ideas and then sort of having the one that you want to work on, and then the sort of butt in seat and grind it out time, right? And this one tends to precede those aha moments that she's sort of chasing. They tend to precede times of incubation, right? Which basically means that you've done your research on the project, you understand the problem you're trying to solve, the project you're trying to do, and then you switch or you take a break and you push it to sort of the back of your mind, the subconscious. And we don't actually know what happens there, but we know that interesting things happen when you take some time to incubate on an idea. Sometimes you have that aha moment, and other times it's just when you return to the task, you're better able to come up with and find that right idea. And then once you have it, then you go into grinding out the work. Now, the most productive creative professionals, the most productive creative entrepreneurs, they incubate by task switching, right? So they'll work on one project for a little while, and then they'll switch to another one so that the original project is incubating in the back of their mind. What your designer that you hired is not doing is she's essentially not doing that. Not learning to flip tasks so that she can incubate. She's thinking she just needs to incubate all of them at once. And the research supports that that's not necessary. As long as you're focusing on something other than task one, it's incubating. Whether or not you're not focusing, relaxing with a glass of wine, or whether you're just doing any other task. For example, a lot of times when I'm writing, I use email as that. So when I get stuck writing a book or an article or something like that, that's when I open up my mail app. That's when I go in and check my email and just spend 10, 20 minutes working on that to allow whatever I was just working on to incubate a little bit. That way I stay productive, but I actually get to leverage incubation.
That's fascinating what you're saying about incubation, because there's a lot of advice out there from experts who are saying that you have to focus on one thing. Don't do any multitasking. Finish this job before you continue with another job. And I understand up to a certain extent what they mean, but on the other hand, I also think, well, sometimes I need to do something else. I cannot do the same thing for 8 hours because my productivity will go down for that specific task. I can do it for 1 or 2 hours and then switch to something else. And then indeed, as you say, it could be incubating in the back of my mind. So I'm more productive again when I pick it up 3 hours later. You support that idea of switching?
Yeah, again, it comes down to what the task demands of you, right? So original creative thought, you need to have that incubation time and task switching. Once you know what it is, then focusing in. And so the thing that I'm not telling you is that when I'm writing and I know what I'm writing, my email app is off. I don't have push notifications. I don't have any notifications set on my... Apple probably hates me because I don't have any push notifications whatsoever. And in fact, I actually once spoke at a conference that was sponsored by a company that like specializes in how to use push notifications on a smartphone to sell stuff. And I talked about how much I hate push notifications for that reason. When it's time to focus, it's time to focus. And that's the research on multitasking doesn't really exist, and all of the distractions that come with trying to do it, I fully support. But there's a difference between that and when you're still looking to figure out what it is you're going to work on.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about boring offices, David? That's the question that I got. How can I be creative among 4 gray walls?
So there's not, I'm actually looking into this for my next book on open offices, closed offices, half closed offices. And there's actually not a lot of research that supports one or the other or that sort of thing. In fact, I found everything from some research that says a little bit of boredom can actually be good for your creativity because it increases mind wandering, right? At the same time, there's research about open offices where everybody flows and socializes and it's fun and creative because of the serendipity effect. There's really not a lot of research one way or the other. I think the reason for that is I think that comes down to individual sort of needs, right? So I have a fairly boring office. It's very industrial. I have a pole that keeps the whole building up right behind me. It's kind of a cool architectural feature, but I know that it's really, they cut into my office so that they could keep the whole building up. It's not the most creative set out there, but that's not something that sort of I feel like I need. So I really think it comes down to the individual. I will say, though, when it comes time to actually, like we were talking about earlier with distractions, when it comes time to actually crank the work out, then a boring office is actually pretty useful because you can hide in it. When it comes to trying to come up with the ideas, you may want to keep your office or your cube door open and rely on serendipity. So again, we come back to sort of a recurring theme throughout a lot of it is we can't take a belief about one's part of the creative process and make it apply to the whole process. The different times in the process call for different measures.
Right. You sound like a consultant, David. It depends.
Well, I'm an academic, so my training is in social science, organizational behavior. So there's a lot of it depends inside of that. Sorry.
And that is the true answer. That is very often as I teach myself to many people. That's the true answer, the honest answer, though not the answer that many people want to hear because they want the simple answers. But that's the way it is. Is it the same for the impact of all the developments and trends we now see in the 21st century, like remote working, flex time, co-working spaces, virtual teams? Is that increasing our potential for creativity, or is it hurting us in a way? What do you think?
So I think it's increasing our potential for sure. If I'm going to use the word potential, yes. For a couple of reasons. Things like telework and flex time and job sharing, those actually increase the number of people whose minds we get to bring in and tap into for a problem, for sure. But there's also benefits to having everybody in the room, right? And so I don't know that I come out in favor of any one particular thing, but I do like the idea that we can we need people all in the room at set times, and then other times to let serendipity happen, to let sort of mind share happen, and then other times we need people, it doesn't matter where people are, etc. So Every company is a little bit different and has to tap into that. I know, I've spoken to leaders of some organizations that are distributed across the globe, but they still twice a year or 4 times a year fly everybody to the same place so that we can take advantage of everybody in the same room, right? And then you have other examples like Yahoo here in the States famously recalled all of their teleworking policies and said everybody has to come back in the office. I think that was more about performance management than about creativity. But so we have all of these things debated. I think truthfully, you write about this a lot. I think that could be even considered part of the agile process. Is you've got to experiment and figure out what's working for your people. In general, though, I'm in favor of any policy that allows more people to come to work because we can then use their benefit from their intellectual capital. How we play that out, it varies by the team.
Exactly. So, what is it I, as a manager, need to do in an organization? What would be the first steps if I do not consider my employees or my organization as a whole to be creative and innovative enough? Where do I begin? What's your suggestion?
So I would say they already are. It's a question of practice, and I end the book with the 10th myth in the book is what I call the Mousetrap Myth. And it's this idea that we're really good at recognizing creative ideas, right? If you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. And it's not actually true. Most people are terrible at recognizing great creative new ideas because creative ideas are new and they're useful or practical at the same time. And all we have to judge practicality is old things. So when something's new, we have nothing to judge it on. And further research shows managers in particular are really bad at judging ideas because they're judging it on their practicality. If I send this idea up the chain, how likely is it that it's going to get approved, right? And some research suggests managers can actually reject ideas that customers from that very organization favor, right? Because they're new and they're useful, but they're not seen as all that practical. And so the very first thing I think managers and leaders can do is just a simple act of suspending judgment, right? So one of the examples recently that I've written about that I love is Adobe, which is already a fairly creative company, started this program called Kickbox. And it's essentially this little box that teaches employees, if you have an idea for a new program, a new product, a new process, whatever it is, here's everything you need to run a beta test on it, right? Including some, traditional stuff like Post-it notes and notepads and whatever, but also including a $1,000 Visa prepaid card that allows people to spend money on whatever they need in order to test the idea. So essentially, instead of having $1 million R&D budget and having to go through all these layers of approval, they said, here, we're giving anybody who wants it, anybody can request one. The only, I think, requirement is that you have to, if you want a second one, you have to present the results of the first one, right? But anybody can require it. And what that essentially does is it gives everyone permission to try stuff and says, we won't judge it till you're done, which is a reversal of, I think, a lot of normal organizations where even to try things, you have to pitch and sell your idea. And I think that right there allows that mousetrap to work. And at the very first time you pitch something and it gets rejected, you learn it's easier just to sit in your seat and be a good little office cubicle rat, right? So giving people that permission, I think, is really important just for letting people experiment and letting them realize, that's the true secret of kindergarten, right? There's no wrong answers in kindergarten. You just present and explore, and you'll learn something if you explore hard enough.
Right. And I find that a fascinating idea, the Kickbox that you just suggested. What about internal crowdfunding? I've heard of companies that basically delegate the investment in great ideas to the crowd, to the employees themselves, where they all get virtual dollars or euros in our case, and then are asked to invest in each other's projects, and then may the best one win. Have you seen such implementation?
Yeah, so in the book, I actually write about a company in the US called Right Solutions that does exactly that. And the reason they did it was, again, it doesn't sort of suspend judgment because you still have to pitch, but it takes away the stigma of being wrong, right? So when one manager is evaluating an idea, she's thinking about, okay, if I send this up to the next level and it gets rejected, I look bad, and that reflects poorly on me, so I'm only going to send up ideas that seem practical, right? But if you're just investing virtual currency, then the pain of being wrong is lessened, drastically. So I think that leads to people more likely to invest in ideas that are new, and it works really, really well. So that was actually when the book came out, programs like Kickbox didn't exist, so I couldn't write about them then. But the idea stock markets, I think, are great for that. They're still judging an idea before it gets launched, but they're taking away the pain of being wrong, which means that they're de-emphasizing the practical, and what fills that is the new and fun and exciting and creative.
Exactly, and convincing your peers sound much more fun to me than convincing upper management layers who have a very a different approach to managing or to judging projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, last question: which is your favorite myth? Hold up your book again, David. Let us see it. The myths of creativity. There are 10 myths in them.
There are.
All right. Which one is your favorite?
So I would say that the Mousetrap Myth is the one that I think is I talk about most inside of organizations because I see it the most. My favorite is actually probably this one called the originality myth. So we think that all creative new ideas are wholly original, that they came out of the ether, fully formed and wholly original. And in reality, most creative people will tell you, and the science supports it, that all ideas are combinations of pre-existing ideas. Right? Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, and he didn't invent the assembly line. He put those two things together and created something magical. And I think that's a really important one to get out, because if you think that ideas are wholly original, then you look at Henry Ford as way up on this pedestal, right? To where, oh, I don't have an original idea like that. If you start to think about the fact that he was just combining different ideas, then you don't really have an excuse anymore, and get out there and learn and see what ideas you can combine. And that, I think, opens the door up to everybody. If ideas are combinations of pre-existing ideas, then just get a lot of ideas and you can have the same level of genius.
Right. Well, I wholeheartedly agree. Stealing and tweaking, I call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So get your uncrediting as well. Always credit your sources.
Well, I am an academic, so citing your sources is important. But see, that's the interesting thing is Ford cited his sources, and he was taken to court for violating the patent on the automobile, and he openly said, "No, I copied from everybody. If I didn't have their ideas, then I wouldn't have been successful." Right? So being aware of it is important, not pretending that your idea is wholly original, but crediting out and saying, "No, I got this from that."
All right, awesome. What's your next book about, David?
So interestingly, because on that open office plan, the next book is looking at what policies, what practices leaders have that engage employees better, not necessarily on the creative front, but actually make sort of the workplace better with a favoritism towards sort of counterintuitive policies, right? So my favorite example is Zappos and Amazon.com both have programs where they pay employees to quit. Zappos after primary training, Amazon.com every year during your performance review. And it seems like, okay, so it seems a little weird. Why would you pay someone who wants to leave the organization? If you think about it for 60 seconds, you realize, well, people who are going to quit anyway, this gets them out before they do further damage. And that's true. But the other thing is it leverages our internal sort of cognitive biases and can actually lead to a higher level of commitment from people who reject the offer. Those offers are actually a great deal when people reject them, because then they're more likely to show up and prove to themselves why they didn't take the easy money. And so what I'm trying to do in the next book is look at all these things that seem a little odd at first, and then pair it with the psychology research that shows, no, this is actually a better idea than sort of business as usual. So.
All right, I will very much look forward to that. Does it have a title yet, the new book?
Yeah, so the title is Under New Management. It won't be out for another year or so, but we settled on the title a while back, Under New Management. The idea being, if all of these policies seem so weird because they're not traditional management practices, then maybe management needs new management.
All right, perfect. I totally agree with that. So Under New Management, a book that I will be looking forward to. So thank you, David, for joining me, and I will be.
Thank you for having me.
I will be sure to promote your current book, The Myths of Creativity, wherever I go. When people ask me or tell me that they can draw, then I will tell them, just read David's book.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad to provide that ammunition. That's great.
All right. Thank you for joining. Bye bye.
Thank you.